Good morning, everybody. This is Jeff Keeney, Director of the LSU AgCenter Botanic Gardens at Burden. Welcome to our first virtual Green Stick Workshop. We apologize for the technical difficulties we had last week, but we are online and streaming well today. So I'd like to thank the Baton Rouge Orchid Society for agreeing to come and share their expertise and their knowledge about orchids, especially those orchids that you may be purchasing at one of the local stores. You get it home, it's beautiful for a while, for a good long while, and then you lose the blooms and you don't know what to do with it. Well, today you're going to learn what you need to do to keep that orchid healthy, beautiful, and reblooming in your house. So I'm going to go ahead and let the first speaker get started.
Good morning. Today I'm going to talk about Phalaenopsis. One of my first orchids was a Phalaenopsis. I was living way up north in Shreveport, and there was an ad in the local paper that the Shreveport Orchid Society had placed. Come to a free public seminar and learn how to grow orchids. Well, I had been reading some Nero Wolfe books and had an interest in orchids, so I went to the public seminar. And I won a door prize. So then I had to join the society so I could learn how to take care of my orchid. And that started it all. So why Phalaenopsis? They're also called moth orchids. They're a favorite for growing indoors. You can find them at many retail stores. Local grocery stores have them, as well as floral shops. One of my favorites are the big box stores, and even some nurseries will have orchids and orchid supplies. I feel like they're reasonably easy to take care of. They're different, but easy to take care of. And one of the best things is the flowers last and last. I have flowers in my kitchen window that have certainly lasted 3 months. So they're really a joy for that reason. And they can be rebloomed year after year. Some of the characteristics of the Phalaenopsis. They're an epiphytic orchid. That means they grow on another plant. They're not terrestrial or grow in the ground. Their roots establish themselves on trees or other plants. And you can see in the picture on the right, the roots are certainly kind of unruly and growing everywhere in these aerial roots. The roots tend to be grayish to white. They're firm to touch. And when you water them, the tips will get green. As seen here also, the leaves are rather leathery looking, and there are those people who call them cow tongues. When you're choosing a plant, they come in a wide variety of colors, from pinks to whites to oranges to yellows. Some are speckled, some are striped, and many color combinations are available. And the sizes vary as well. On the lower right, you can see this miniature plant, and here's another small miniature you may be able to see. And the plant on the lower left is a rather large plant, and those sprays are 2 feet long. So it's good to look at the plants that are available and choose one that fits the space that you have. One of the things I like about the flowers is that they bloom progressively. So they're going to start at the bottom and they're going to open further toward the end of the tip. So you can see the plant on the upper right, it is in full bloom. The one on the lower right still has a ways to go, so it's going to be in bloom much longer and will remain in bloom a long time. So you've bought your Phalaenopsis. What do you do next? To me, the most important thing is to provide good drainage for the plant. You also need to put it in a place where it's going to get good light, a comfortable temperature, and you're going to have to water, fertilize, and take care of its potting medium as well. These are the topics we're going to look at today. Drainage, as I said, is most important. You can see this plant on the right. These roots are dark, they're soggy, it's been kept way too wet, and it's on its way to a slow death. In contrast, the plant on the lower, these roots are green and vibrant, and they do have the green tips as well. And these are nice, healthy roots. A lot of the plants that you'll find in the stores come in a decorative ornamental pot. And one of the first things I do is I drill holes in the bottom of the pot using a ceramic or masonry type bit. Sometimes I'm not successful in that. In those cases, I either don't use the pot at all, or I have to make sure when I water that plant that it drains exceptionally well before I put it back in the decorative pot. I also make sure it drains well after I've fertilized it before I put it back in the decorative pot. Usually I'm very successful in getting the holes in the pot so it drains well. You need to find a place in your house where it's going to get good light, but you don't want direct light. It can't be in the direct sun. An east or north window tends to be the best windows. South and west windows tend to be too hot. And if you're in a west window, you're certainly going to need some additional shade. One good measure is if you feel the leaves of your plant and they're warm to touch, that means it's too warm and you need to provide some. You can see the shade on the lower picture on the right there. Temperature. Orchids like to be Phalaenopsis like to be usually no cooler than about 60 degrees at night, and they can easily tolerate 75 to 85 during the day. And with stretches, they can go to 90 to 95 degrees if you're providing enough humidity and air movement for the plants. In growing orchids in the house, I like to place them on a gravel tray with some water so the evaporation will help keep the plant moist. One good tip is if you're too hot, so is your orchid. When I water my plants, I would take them to the kitchen sink and let the water run through. A difference between Phalaenopsis and other orchids is that Phalaenopsis don't have a storage organ. They can only store water in their leaves and in their roots. So you really want to water it thoroughly and not water it again until it's really thoroughly dry. There are those who like to put their plants in a bucket of water for like 20 or 30 minutes. I don't usually do this because I'm afraid that I may transfer any diseases, but it still could be done if you have a few number of plants. As seen on the picture on the right, I'm watering from a beverage bottle, and I'm making sure that I'm under the leaves and I'm not getting any water in the top of the leaves, because if I do that, it will cause rot in the top of the crown of the plant. After I water and fertilize, then I would replace it to a decorative pot and place it back in my window. I like to water in the morning so the roots have a chance to dry out. And I've learned recently that you're not supposed to use water that's been through a water softener. I tend to water weekly, but I too try to evaluate my roots and make sure that the plant does need to be watered. Usually in my indoor conditions, a week is about right. And I will also walk by occasionally with a mister and spritz to mist the plants. One thing that I do not do that I know a lot of the manufacturers suggest that you place ice cubes in the plant. I don't think I want to stick my feet in cold water, so I don't think the orchids are going to want to have their roots cold either. I like to fertilize dilutely. I usually use a quarter teaspoon per gallon. This is a very dilute solution. I water the plant and then I also re-water it with my fertilizer solution. The American Orchid Society recommends a fertilizer of 30-10-10 on bark-based media, which is how I grow most of my Phalaenopsis. And I usually fertilize weekly, sometimes every 2 weeks. Fertilizing is beneficial to the plants, but light and water are by far more important. Fertilization is more like vitamins for the plant. Water and light are key. The media that your Phalaenopsis grows in needs to be porous so it will drain well. A lot of the plants you find in the stores are in sphagnum moss, which holds a lot of water because they've been transported like that. I, on occasion, have left them in the sphagnum moss for even up to a year, but I like to change the media so that I don't overwater and rot my roots. Orchiata bark is the bark of a New Zealand pine tree, and it's an excellent media because it does not deteriorate well, and I mix that with charcoal and sponge rock. A lot of people also like to put a few styrofoam peanuts in the bottom of the pot to allow for better drainage and also make the pot a little lighter. Repotting is a whole separate lesson unto itself. I think the important things to remember about growing Phalaenopsis indoors is you absolutely must have good drainage. You need indirect filtered light. A touch of humidity is helpful. Air movement would be nice. A comfortable temperature is key. And you need to develop a watering schedule so you don't overwater your plants. Most people kill their Phalaenopsis from overwatering their plants. And make sure your fertilization is consistent, weak solution. Some of the reference I used to this for the American Orchid Society's website has excellent information. I really like the St. Augustine, Florida Orchid Society website. They have a plethora of information on all sorts of orchids. They're located on a similar latitude as we are, so a lot of their information applies to us in the Baton Rouge area. There's a lot of information on the internet as well, plus my own personal experience. So this morning, I hope I have shed some light on how you can successfully grow Phalaenopsis in your home. The question was, do I have a favorite place where I like to buy my Phalaenopsis? And the short answer is Trader Joe's. I get the media that I grow my Phalaenopsis in, I can buy it here locally, or you can also buy it over the web. We have a question on where do I cut my flower stem after the flower has bloomed. And I like to choose somewhere at the second node. And if it's a nice healthy plant, you'll get reblooming. This is the first node, here is the second node. So after this plant blooms as a nice healthy plant, I would cut it right above that second node and I have an opportunity to have a second bloom spike come out with more flowers. It doesn't always occur, and certainly if it's not a nice healthy plant, you don't want to do it. But I've been successful in getting second blooms in the same season. Are there other questions? The question is, can I grow Phalaenopsis orchids outside? I have been very unsuccessful with that myself in South Louisiana. It's too hot and it's too wet and too bright. Phalaenopsis like a little cooler temperature, not so much water, and not so much heat.
Good morning, my name is Glenn Gabareski, and I'm going to share some information with everyone about growing Cattleya orchids, primarily by reviewing some of the answers to questions I get from time to time. The picture you can see on the screen is a classic Cattleya orchid shape. You can see that's a white one. This is also a Cattleya hybrid. The plant generally grows upright. There is a bulb. That's the bulb here below the leaves that provides a water storage for the plant. Typically 1 to 3 leaves, and then a prominent lip, often with ruffles and large petals. And while I really like the look of this white Cattleya on the page, as well as this one, they may not appeal to everyone. And for the folks that they don't appeal to, I've got good news. There are dozens of species of Cattleya, hundreds, if not thousands of Cattleya hybrids, and all of them grow really well in our area. The pictures you can see here on the screen, a wide variety of colors, shapes, sizes, and if you don't find a cattleya on the page that appeals to you, there are hundreds of others, and what you can't see on the page is a lot of the cattleya orchids are fragrant, and so everyone likes a really pretty flower that has a nice fragrance. I'm confident that there's a cattleya that will work for you. What do cattleyas need to grow well? Cattleyas really need just about the same thing that every other plant needs, just a matter of degree. So they certainly need light. They need a bright light, brighter than the Phalaenopsis typically to bloom well. You can grow them outside or inside. You just have to have some precautions for the amount of light. Water and humidity, they do like to dry out a little bit between watering, so a well-draining mix is good for the cattleyas, and 50 to 80% humidity is usually not a problem for us in this area. Air movement is good. It helps the plant keep the leaves cool, helps avoid some of the diseases that you may get without a good air movement, but you don't necessarily need a fan for that. You do get good air movement outside generally on a day, as well as in your house from just the movement from your air conditioning or your heating. Ceiling fans can help. Temperatures ideally between 55 and 85 degrees. Inside the house, that's usually not a problem. Outside, we obviously get a lot hotter than that and a lot colder than that. Good news is cattleyas will tolerate hotter and colder temperatures. Primarily just need to keep them from freezing. And then food, Hal mentioned that food is not essential to the plant growing, but it does help it reach its full potential. Same is true for the cattleyas. They will grow if you're giving adequate light and water, but fertilizer will help them reach their full potential. How much light do my cattleyas need? I get that question a good bit. For folks who are a little more technical or like a little more technical information, 3,000 to 5,000 foot candles is ideal for cattleyas. The unfortunate thing is that's hard to tell with the human eye. But there are, free phone apps out there. There are relatively inexpensive instruments that will measure light intensity. And so for folks who like that kind of information, that's what's appropriate for cattleyas. For people who are a little less technical and want to take my word for it, 50% shade cloth in our sunny area works really well for cattleyas. That will be plenty of light to help them rebloom, and almost all the cattleyas will tolerate that much. Some will tolerate a little more light, some will like a little bit less, but that's a really solid setup if you want to just have a shade cloth in a sunny. Some trees will provide an appropriate amount of sunlight or shade beneath them. Some patios will do well. Ideally, you want to shoot for at least 5 hours of good light a day to keep them happy and blooming well. Temperature, they can overheat, so you be a little bit careful. Often you can just feel the leaves and get a sense of whether the leaf feels warm or feels hot. If it does, maybe a little bit less light, a little more air movement to help that plant tolerate. Getting ready to look at some of how we water, but I'll just point to the picture on the top right before we go to the next page. You see that is a cattleya orchid mounted on a piece of wood outside in a 50% shade cloth area, growing quite well. It's blooming quite well, but has no media around it. Essentially, it's mounted on wood. And that's the question I get probably the most is how often should I water my orchid? And the unfortunate answer is it depends. My mom would probably say I was being a smart aleck, but the reality is that's the best answer I can give. Is it really depends. It depends on the person. I think how they like to water. Some people water a lot. Some people don't like to water at all, and that matters about how often you water your plant. The pictures on this page are trying to just illustrate the point. We looked at the mounted orchid. It's growing on a piece of wood. It has no media, and so you're going to need to water that thing a lot, as much as every day to keep it healthy. The net pots provide good air circulation. If you put something like styrofoam in there or mulch, it's going to dry out very fast within a couple of days, and you'll need to water it fairly often. Clay pots don't allow as much air movement. they will hold moisture a little bit longer, and so you'll need to water a little bit less. And then the type of mix or media you put in the pot matters. If it drains really well, such as a styrofoam or charcoal and sponge rock, you'll have to water a little more frequently. If you have things like haydite or other ceramic or inorganic media, bark, they'll hold a little bit more moisture, and you'll have to water a little less often. And if you use a plastic pot, that retains even more moisture. So the key is to figure out how you like to water, and then figure out how to match your watering habits and the plant you want to grow with the media that you grow it in. And so that's not a one size fits all. It really does depend, but you can do it well, and you can trial and error, figure out how that plant wants to work in your environment. This page, when I first started, people would talk about bark and mix and media and haydite, and I didn't have a good sense of what those things were. So this page is for the folks the same problem as I did. And the left, those first 2 or 3 are commercial orchid mixes. I was a little surprised with the one on the top left. It looks like soil to me. Cattleya orchid is going to struggle to do well in a mix that heavy. There's a good chance you're going to rot the roots if you're not really careful. All the bottom right, which is just plain old styrofoam, doesn't hold moisture hardly at all, and everything in between, the charcoal, the perlite, sponge rock, even corks. I've seen a number of orchids. I have a couple growing in cork, and they seem to do fine. So what they're growing in, they're not too particular about. It's more about how much moisture it holds and how well the material drains. What problems might I experience? I get that a fair amount. You can certainly give an orchid too much light, even a Cattleya. The pictures on the page, you can see some sunburn on the leaves there. They got a little bit too much light. The more frequent folks will have a complaint that their orchids are not reblooming. For Cattleya orchid, generally it's because they're not having enough light, and that's the more common problem. Temperature can too hot or too cold, but again, the Cattleyas are very tolerant, except for freezing. And then the second most frequent question and issue is really around water. You can underwater a Cattleya. It will tend to shrivel a little bit. It will tend to dry out, but it'll survive for quite a while if you're giving it inadequate water. The thing that will do it in quicker is if you're watering it too much. If the roots are staying too wet too long, they will rot. And then when they can't bring up moisture and nutrients, the plant will start to shrivel and make diseases and die. And that's probably the most frequent problem that people have, is too much water, too wet in the root. And food, for the folks that grow orchids indoors, one of the things to be careful with the fertilizer, as over time, the salts and residual materials in the fertilizer can accumulate in the mix and the media, so it's really good on some frequency, monthly or every couple of months, to flush that media really well with fresh water with no fertilizer to wash those materials out. Do you need a greenhouse to grow Cattleyas? No, you don't. Again, the key is to just keep them from freezing and to manage the amount of light that they're getting so that you don't burn them and you have enough light to rebloom. You can grow them indoors, having them near just about any window. North facing is probably the least desirable because it will be difficult to get enough light, but east, west, or south will work okay. Just be sensitive to how close they are to the window, how hot the plant's getting, and how much light. You can certainly use artificial lights as well. Patios and porches we mentioned. There are a lot of really small greenhouses that work just fine. If you want to have a small greenhouse to manage your orchids over the winter, the caution I would provide for folks that either make their own or purchase a greenhouse is that in the wintertime, if the doors are closed, they can overheat very quickly. In a matter of hours, you can be well over 120 degrees, and your plants will not handle that. Where can I get Cattleyas? You can get Cattleyas actually in a lot of places. One particular store that I've seen them in is Lowe's. They're typically in the garden center or near the garden center. You can see on the picture, they typically have a rack like that, and the cattleyas are usually on the bottom. They're relatively small plants. Sometimes they'll be blooming size, but more frequently, they're 1 to 3 years from blooming size. Obviously, you can find them at other as well, other nurseries, other plant places that sell plants. But that's one in particular. The pictures there on the page are all cattleyas that were being sold at Lowe's, just to give folks an idea. And the pictures in the bottom right, I had heard people mention bag babies. I didn't know what that was, so I thought I would put it on the page. It's essentially a small orchid plant in a little plastic net bag. Again, those plants are frequently 1 to 3 years from blooming, but my experience is that they sell good plants. There are lots of online and local sellers, nurseries and individuals as well. I've had good luck with those. I would recommend that you ask some other folks which growers they've had good experience, because there are some that are better than others. Orchid Society meetings, a lot of my orchids came from our monthly society meetings. Often the presenters will have orchids to sell. Sometimes the society itself will offer orchids. Obviously, orchid shows and exhibits. We have our annual show here. Lots of other societies around the Gulf Coast have shows, and you can certainly get really nice orchids there. And other society members frequently are dividing their collection or will offer a plant to be available. For questions about orchids, this is obviously a new forum, but the American Orchid Society has a wonderful website, lots of information, both in writing as well as in video. It's accessible to the public, as well as some additional information for members. That's a really nice reference place. The local Orchid Society has been probably my favorite, because I can talk to people, very open, very willing to answer questions, very helpful, like most plant people. And internet is a wonderful tool. I would caution you that some of the information on the internet may not be the best. And so when you're getting your information strictly from the internet, you may want to cross-check it from multiple sources on the internet to try to make sure you're getting good advice and not bad advice. And probably my favorite is trial and error. Someone told me once that you can learn a lot from what doesn't work. And certainly if you try some things and it doesn't work, now you know what not to do, and don't do that again. Try the next thing or another thing. And over time, you'll gain enough experience to be able to grow cattleyas well. Any questions? The question was whether we sell orchids at the Baton Rouge Orchid Society meetings, and I would say at most of the meetings there are orchids for sale, whether that is through the presenter. Often they will bring the orchids of the type they are presenting about. Sometimes the society will have orchids available for the members. And so, yeah, I've gotten a number of orchids at the monthly meetings. And some are free. They have door prizes typically, where your names are drawn, and typically the door prizes are orchids. There are other programs for growing orchids and trialing some orchids, where you can also often pick up orchids for free. And even members often will bring some of their extra plants when they've made divisions, or they're just trying to downscale, or decided they don't like a particular type of orchid. They will bring and make them available to folks at the meeting. On the Phalaenopsis, Hal mentioned about cutting it down above the second node. For the cattleyas, it's really not the same. For the cattleyas, I do one of two things. I'll either let the flower stem die off until it's essentially died off, and then I'll cut it off. Other times I'll do it while it's still green, after the flowers have fallen off. When I do that, I generally will spray it with a little peroxide, just to help ensure I don't get infection at the cut. Some use cinnamon to help ensure that they reduce the chances of getting infection there. Sulfur is another thing I've seen some of the growers use on a fresh cut to try to minimize the chance for infection. Yeah, this is one of the Cattleya orchid hybrids. You can see it's upright, has the pseudobulb here for water storage. The flower is very pretty. The lip is very prominent. Not all the Cattleya hybrids have such a prominent lip. curled or furled around the edges and a nice presentation. A lot of folks remember these as the orchids that corsages were frequently made of in the past. I still see those from time to time, and they definitely catch your eye.
Hello, I'm Wesley Matthews with the Baton Rouge Orchid Society, and today I'm going to be talking about Dendrobium orchids. Dendrobiums are the second largest genus, which they have over 1,500 species, not including the hybrids. They're epiphytic in nature, which means it grows on rocks and trees. They have arch inflorescences on cane-like pseudobulbs. They get quite tall. They also grow in a variety of climates. The main types of dendrobiums are the Phalaenopsis type, which is the ones you most often see in the big box stores. Antelope dendrobiums, which you get to see in the middle, that they have antelope-like horns on top of them. And then the Nobile type, which these are the ones that they have to have a dry rest period. They're usually very nice looking. They are a little bit harder to grow. How to grow dendrobiums. This is a little bit of the general care. Light. Dendrobiums like lots of light, but not direct sun. A south-facing window tends to be the best. Greenhouses or in the trees, about 30 to 50% shade. If you're growing indoors, they tend to need a little bit of extra light. Incandescent bulbs or some fluorescent tubes directly overhead. Temperatures. Many of the dendrobiums can handle days of 80 to 90 plus degrees, but you must provide adequate ventilation and humidity. You have to watch it during the times that it gets, here in South Louisiana, it gets over 95 degrees, and you just have to pretty much make sure that the orchid has proper ventilation. You can also put fans on them to prevent the heat buildup around the leaves. If you touch the leaf and it feels hot, or it's usually too hot. Inside, people grow them on trays with rocks in the bottom with water to keep adequate humidity. Outside, usually fine. You can put these under your large crepe myrtle trees around, and they tend to do very, very well. Dendrobiums, on the other hand, do not like anything lower than 50 degrees. Typically, if a dendrobium is outside and it hits a couple of nights below 50 degrees, you'll see the leaves will yellow and drop, even though the dendrobium is still alive. It's just you're going to lose some leaves. Watering, water until it drains out of the bottom. You want to adequately keep it wet, but also you want for it to drain. Canes on the dendrobium should not appear shriveled. Usually they'll be really good and plump. Once they start to shrivel, that means that either your roots are rotting or you're not getting adequate moisture. Fertilizing. Typically, I grow when I fertilize during the growing months on a dendrobium, February, March to September to October. Usually weekly is what we use. A quarter to a half a teaspoon of fertilizer per gallon. Usually a 20-20-20 or similar fertilizer. You can get it at most box stores. Just the orchid fertilizer, Miracle-Gro, it'll all work. Just go by the directions on the back. But like as Hal and Glenn said, fertilizer is just pretty much vitamins for the plant. the main thing that they get their energy from is light. They need light, some moisture, and air movement. Potting dendrobiums. Dendrobiums relatively need small pots. They like to be root bound, especially with the younger plants. Don't try to put a small plant in a large pot because it will rot it. You repot them every 2 to 3 years. Sometimes you don't repot them that often. It depends on your media, if it's broken down or how big the plant is. If you do repot, remove the old media, clean your pots, remove any of the black or decayed roots. You'll tell most orchids, the roots will just they turn into paper when they're dead. They're really, really fragile. Place the oldest cane, which is the oldest cane, at the edge of the pot, where the new growth, where it comes up, will, it will have room inside of the pot to grow. We usually loose mix. The Baton Rouge Orchid Society members use various mixes. Many use a third of orchiata, which is a bark, a third of charcoal, and a third of sponge rock or large perlite. Seems to do well. We call it a tri-mix. As I was talking about the specifics on the Nobile dendrobiums, these growing phase is water when slightly dry. They have a rest phase, usually through November to January, February, and you don't really water them then. They like to have that dry season so that when they start to grow in the spring, that's where they actually bloom from. If a plant gets stressed, little or no flowers will be produced. But we'll put out kikis, little plantlets at the top of the canes. Instead of flowers on a Dendrobium nobile, it will produce baby plants, which some people, that's okay. But if you do produce kikis, when it gets about 4 to 6 inches long and roots 2 to 3 inches long, you can actually cut those off and pot them up in a small pot, and you have a new plant. Why grow dendrobiums? Well, they do really well in our climate. Here in Baton Rouge, they do very well. They will get out of hand, actually. That's how well they grow here. They're easy to grow. They don't take a lot of care, and flowers last for 6 to 8 weeks. Some of these here, well, this one's just now starting to bloom, but some of these, they're 3 weeks old and they still look like they just opened. And that's why a lot of people like them. Typically, dendrobiums, they don't have a whole lot of scent. I haven't known of really many dendrobiums that have a fragrance, but they do last a long time. We hope that you enjoy growing this spectacular orchid species. Okay, the question was, when a dendrobium gets done blooming, how do we cut the spike off? Typically, when a dendrobium finishes blooming, it's not going to rebloom from the same spike. So I would cut it right above the top, usually the first node or the second node, which you can see here. This one was cut at the second node. When it gets done blooming, just cut it off, and that way it's not trying to put more energy into a spot that's not producing anything, and it actually will give more, energy to the plant. Okay, the question was, should you cut the old growth off when repotting? Typically, I would say no, because a lot of times the old cane is still green, but for instance, this one here, it is brown, and you can feel that it is soft to the touch. That you would remove, but if it's still green, that's still a storage cane for energy if that plant needs it. So no, do not cut it off unless it is brown. And then if you do cut it off, use a little bit of cinnamon or just use a clean, sterilized razor blade to cut it off. The question was, can they bloom on old canes? I've never had one rebloom on an old cane, but some people have had them rebloom on an old cane. But me personally, my personal experience is I have not had one rebloom on an old cane.
Hi, my name is Frank Zachariah. Now I'm going to talk about VANDAS. So this is another alliance in the orchid family. So why grow VANDAS when all these other plants are so nice? Well, there is a reason. Number one, VANDAS come in a huge range of colors. If you look at this picture here, some of them are real blue jean blue. That's the one I circled. A lot of them are spotted. And if you look at the bottom, there's even a black one. Also, they come in a big range of sizes. There's little tiny ones that are 4 to 6 inches, which I have this one here. Oh, no, I have this one here. And this one usually smells like cotton candy. And it has a slight fragrance right now, but it's not really strong right now. But I've smelled it where I've walked in the greenhouse, I could smell the plant. And then some of them are big. You can see there's one right next to it with this the size of this guy. So the other thing about VANDAS is they love our climate. These two are in a tropical rainforest. And where do we live? We live in a subtropical rainforest. So we have lots of rain, as we all know. We have high temperatures. The temperature that VANDAS like are between 7 nights and 90-degree days. That's my backyard. That's your backyard. And unlike humans, VANDAS like high humidity. So I'm going to talk about four parts, and that's these 4 parts: potting, light, water, and winter. Potting's the easiest. You don't do it. You don't use any media for a Vanda. See how this one's just hanging right there? And that's how VANDAS are grown, with no media. So when you buy them, the roots are just hanging free, and I don't know if you can see this. How about that? That's how you buy a Vanda. So that's kind of easy, huh? This is a commercial greenhouse, and a beautiful commercial greenhouse. And when you have roots, then you a lot of flowers on your Vanda. Light. So as other people have said, you need bright light for orchids. 30 to 50% shade, or 5,000 foot candles. Now, as Glenn said, the human eye can't tell if it's 40% shade or 60% shade. There's just no way that you can tell. There's free light apps for the phone, and they will tell you exactly how much light you've got. And for VANDAS, they like the highest light of all the orchids that we've discussed, and they would prefer 5,000 foot candles. Water. All right, we just had a little weather incident. We didn't get slammed too bad with it in Baton Rouge, but the problem with growing flowers in Baton Rouge is most of the flowers that we grow get smashed with our rain. I grow pansies, I grow petunias, and even the zinnias, and they'll get squashed. VANDAS come from an area with monsoon rainfall, so they love when we get a whole lot of rain. So what we want to do is, in the summertime, they want to be spritzed daily. May even do it twice daily when it's real hot, and then you get a really nice group of flowers like this. So look at that crazy flower on the left, checkered black with a bright purple lip. And then the one on the right looks like little red spiders. Now, if you're not really good about watering, I use it for therapy. Go out there and it's like, this is the way I wind down. But if you don't want to water quite that much, you can just buy a cheap timer. There's some that are $40, expensive ones about $100, and it'll water every day for you. You don't have to worry about that. If you do this, you'll get really good root systems, like these root systems, and a really good root system means you're going to get really good flowers. So this is the LSU Orchid Conservatory. This is just a few feet from where I am right now, and in it there's over 1,000 orchids, including some of the ones you've seen in the previous presentations. So, and we invite you all to come out here. We do have it locked up because some of these orchids are very valuable, but all you have to do is either ask a member of the Baton Rouge Orchid Society or somebody at Burden, and they'll open it up for you. We do have we've got donations last fall with some small VANDAS, and that's the ones that are hanging up that you see right there. And hopefully within a year or so, we're going to get some really nice flowers off of these. So what do we do in the winter? Well, we don't live in the tropics. So VANDAS are a tropical thing. They will freeze, and then you don't have a VANDA anymore. So you've got to keep them from freezing. That's really the only requirement. They prefer 50-degree nights, but some of us, including me, are cheap with our heat, and my greenhouse usually goes down to 35, and they don't die. They don't like it, but they don't die. They also like bright light in the wintertime, so if you're going to bring them inside, put them near a window. And the good thing is that you don't have to water them as much as you do in the summertime. They'll have a little bit of rest period. What you get out of them. So the VANDAS also have relatives. This is one of the relatives. They have a lot of crazy things that happens. This is a Rhynchostylus. These will get 4 feet long, and they just hang down in pendants in many different colors. So that's the presentation on VANDAS. One thing that I do want to say is all 4 of us, we've given you different directions on how to grow these 4 alliances. All 4 of us have all of these in our greenhouses. So they're tolerant of different things. So what we'll do is we'll hang the VANDAS where they get higher. We'll put the Phalaenopsis where they're not quite as wet, and you can go ahead and adjust them so that you can grow a whole bunch of different orchids. If you have any questions about any of this, we have a Facebook page, we have a website. You're welcome to go ahead and put a picture on our Facebook page, and someone will give you some hopefully some good information on how to grow it here. We also would like y'all to come to our meetings. Our meetings are still Zoom right now, as everything is Zoom. But you some nice people, and as Glenn says, you have plants either for sale, or we almost always have free plants there, and you'll go home with a free orchid if you do that. Okay, questions? The question was, how often does a VANDA bloom? If you have an old VANDA, they are almost ever blooming. They're like an impatiens once you get a very big VANDA. When they're young, and they don't like cool weather. So if you're keeping them warm, and you get a really nice big one like next to that guy, you'll get blooms for months and months out of them. So how would you go about fertilizing it? So what you would normally do is you would use a liquid fertilizer like a Miracle-Gro, and you can put it in one of those spray jars, hose-in spray jars, or a Siphon-X, or however, and just do it once a week, or however the more you do it, if it's bright light, hopefully the more flowers you're going to get out of it. They're very easy to grow. Like I said, they really like our climate here. Any other questions? Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for listening to this.
So thank you all for joining us for our virtual Green Stick workshop. Frank forgot to show you these wonderful VANDAS behind him. See this? Which one is this, Frank? Do you have a name for it? A pet name? And here's another beautiful Vanda. See the beautiful flowers on it. So I would like to thank the Baton Rouge Orchid Society once again for sharing their expertise with us about orchids and continuing their bloom in your homes and your gardens. Stick with us for the next Green Stick Workshop. Will be November the 14th, and we'll have some professionals come in and help you determine what are the best ways to decorate your home for the holidays with different types of plant material. So thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you November the 14th.